Hey guys, so for this stream, what I was thinking of doing was actually create a destroyable component. Um, Part of it will be, I mean, especially with the collisions, the way I was handling collision might be a little bit of a kind of a hackish way, but it's the only way that I was able to, figure it out, and that's also something that is really simple to explain. So if there be another way to handle collisions that I'll find in the future, I'll probably update this. But for now, I'll show you what I have. So hopefully the result of today will be this. I'll just show you what I currently have for my test project. So let's open up the level. So currently I have two entities here. So one of them is this, and let me also pull over the properties panel. So as you can see, the destroyable component has a component life of 10 that you can change. It has an intact geometry and a destroyed geometry. So let's jump into game mode and see how this is affected. And you're also gonna be able to see some tracking of the progress in here. So jumping into game mode, equipping the weapon. So we start firing at it. You see like the life is being decremented. And the one to the right now for this example, I'm not removing the bullets. So if they continue to slide, they'll destroy one of the other entities. So as you can see, now the life of that reached 0, and off it goes, and it's applying a particle effect as well. And you could hear that. Hopefully, you could hear that destroyed sound at the end of once it exploded. So let's try doing that again. I'm just gonna delete this one so we're not confused by it. So equipping the weapon. We're firing at it, and let's see what's going on. Maybe it's just the reset event. Alright, so there you go, the life is decremented, and there's that explosion, at least the sound, and then the particle effect being applied, and the geometry that we specified is used to replace that destroyed object. So I was mentioning that I kind of did a little bit of a hackish way of determining collisions, and that was actually through this property. Since I was never able to figure out what's the entity that hits this, I went off and I was actually able to figure out that we can track the mass of the object that collides with our destructible entity, and based off of that, I said, okay, since this never changes, being that it's the bullet class, the bullet component, I said, okay, let's just compare it with this, and if it's that, then it's probably one of our bullets. If you're gonna have maybe a rocket, you can probably give it a different physical properties, and once you can track those, you'll be able to know that, okay, this object got hit by a rocket, so I'm gonna subtract maybe 10 times the amount of life. So let's get to it. This hopefully won't be too long, but there's quite a few things that we gotta cover. So first things first, let's jump into our project. So that is our stream example right here. So let's reveal that in Explorer, and we're going to fire up our solution. So first things first, let's create our two header and C++ file, because we're going to need those two. So I actually made them in components, and let me make sure I just follow along with my example here. So in here we're just going to do a new text document, and this is going to be, I'm going to name this destroyable component dot h for header, and that's okay. And then let's copy this and paste it right here, and this is going to be our C++. CPP. There we go. So once those are in place, let's go ahead and right-click on our game.project, and generate solution. That's going to add our new files to the solution. So let's generate that. All right, so let's fire up our Visual Studio solution here. Okay, so we have this from previous times, and one thing that I'm going to do was suggested by somebody is to actually create a GitHub for the code. So I'm going to do that. It's for now it's just going to be the code because all the other files are probably not necessarily the same files that you have. Then I'm going to post that in a description later on. Okay, let's open up our header file, move it right here, and then our C++ file. Part of it is going to be, I'm going to be doing a little bit just to kind of speed this along. I'm going to be doing a little bit of copying and pasting for some of the functions that are really common to these components. And let's start off with our pragma1 and the standard header. And since this is also going to be open to schematic, I'm going to be needing a couple of things. So just going to copy these in here. Feel free to pause the video and keep up with it. Okay, so let's create our class. So we got our class, which is going to be a C destroyable component final, and this comes off of a public entity component. Alright, so start off with our public stuff, and pretty much everything is I'm going to be keeping it as public. And we got our constructor, C destroyable component, and let's create this as default. And the destroyer, I think, what is it? The destructor, virtual, and I forget the ampersand. C destroyable component. All right, and this is just going to be empty for now. So let's and I forgot the whole thing here. So this is, I'm just going to copy this because this is everything that normally shows up in your components. You've probably seen this before, initialize, get event mask, a process event, and the serialized properties. I actually don't need this just now. Hopefully we'll be able to work on that sometime in the future. So quickly, I'm just going to select all of this, right click, quick actions and refactoring, and create declaration definition. So it should place all of these in here. Oops, I don't want to do that. I just want to save this. Okay, so now we have the entity component. Let's just also, I'm going to copy and paste in our schematic work. So it's just going to be called schematic. And we have the reflect type, just like all the entities need to have that. Alright, so now this is going to be the functions that are specific to our destroyable component. So this is going to be, I created a void called decrement life, and this is going to be to this one. What I'm passing is that the bullet mass. So float bullet mass, and then I also have a void for destroy objects. So destroy object, and this one actually what I'm passing into this is a path to the destroyable object. So the object that I want to replace my intact, my one piece object. So this is going to be to this one. So it's also open to the editor and schematic. It's going to be a schematic, and it's going to be a geom file name, and let's call this path to destroyed object. Okay, so, and I have another void. This is for applying the effects. So be it a sound, multiple particles, this is what this function is for, and just like that. Okay, since we're thinking of using a some particles, let's also create a local a function that will take care of spawning the particle. So this is going to be an iParticle emitter, particle, and let's see, can we find it in here? Emitter, there we go. And it's going to be a spawn particle. If I can spell that, be splendid. Particle effect. And we're going to pass it in iParticle. It probably doesn't need to be a pointer here for the actual function. I think I got it out of Game SDK, which, by the way, is a very good resource if you're interested in doing certain things. And this is a pointer to our P particle effect. Okay. And so this, I kind of labeled these. I like to put comments in. So particle emitting, then we have a sound playing. So that's going to be a void play sound. Of course, you can have multiple of these if you want to have different sounds. Then I also have another void that's a reset. So this will be taking care of, it's a function that you can call whether you're in initialize in one of the process events, either starting game mode or starting game. That just sets your geometry and your physics. So it just kind of makes it simple. All right, and then let's actually get into the properties for this. So this is going to be kind of the member variables. Okay, so I'm checking OBS every now and again because sometimes it tends to fail for me. Okay, so some of the properties are going to be float, and this is going to be, one of them is going to be mlife, which is how, like I showed you in the example, it was 10. So if you got something that's a little probably more resistant to damage, maybe set it to 20 or so on and so forth. Should be pretty self-explanatory. Then I have a boolean, which is alive. So that is if it's in the destroyed state, or we want to display the destroyed geometry or the intact geometry. And then I also have another boolean which I'm starting to use, and this is called isGameMode, and we'll get into this once we start implementing our events. So game mode. Okay, so that's also a boolean, and now we have to add these schematic geom file names, which we need to be accessible via the editor and also probably schematic once we'll get into using that. So let's create these two. So one of them is going to be intact geom path, and I'm going to give this a value right here. This is just, you can probably do this in the initialize function as well. So I started off in the header. So that's one of them, and then we have a second one. And let's just get this part here. So this is the intact, and then this is going to be the m underscore destroyed geom path. And this one, I've actually given it something else, which just so that when I was doing testing to differentiate between the two. Okay. Also, another thing that I wanted to add is, this is kind of a remainder of when I was trying to figure out how to track the collision and what collided with what. I had an event phys collision, and this is going to be a pointer. I call this p collision. I think I'm using a little bit too many L's. No, that's good. And also another one that's actually I physical entity, because the way we're going to be able to get to this is, or I mean, you could use it. I was trying to use it before, but like I said, it didn't work for me. So I'm not going to add it for now. Probably once I figure out a more a different way of more kind of not so hackish way of doing of tracking what collided with what, I'm going to be adding to this. But for now, let's go ahead and implement all of the interaction with it. The one thing that you need to do, and this is again, I'm just going to copy and paste this stuff, is registering things for schematic. Also, one of the couple of the things that I need to add in here is a couple of headers. And so now to register this, we have the static void register destroyable component, and then this call is defined, I guess, which we're actually calling the reference to this. This kind of take it at the face value. I'm not entirely sure how I can explain it, but always make sure that whenever you're registering it, basically you're passing in the correct name of your class. So with that out of the way, which, like I said, this is something that you're going to need to use in whenever you register something with schematic. Let's get into our initialize function. So first of all, what I'm going to do, I'm going to be setting this this flag. So let's set this game mode to false, because we're currently in the editor. So, and m underscore alive, we're going to set this to true, because we have not yet destroyed the component. And then let's call reset. So reset is the function that will look right after we look into this is game mode here. So in order to do that, we first need to get our event mask. So again, this is just going to be, I'm going to be copying and pasting this because it's very boilerplate type stuff. So as usual, we want to track these events. Event start game, event update. Though this is not really needed at this point. We want an event entity reset, and then the most important one, which is collision. Okay, so let's get into process event. And this one, as always, there we go, starts off with a switch. We're actually switch. And in here, we're actually going to track our events. So we got event.event. So we have a few cases to consider. We have the case of entity underscore event reset, and I should have just copied and pasted it. There we go. Let's do it like that. Okay, this is kind of a way for us to know whether we're in game mode or we're just in the editor part of it. So let's do it like that. So if event dot amperam 0 equals 1. So usually with these events, and you can take a look at, if you hover over the event, you'll see some of the details for it. So you'll see that for this one, if amperam 0 is 1, is entering game mode, and 0 if it's exiting. So that way we can track to see if we're either going into game mode or we're going out of game mode. So in that case, we'll say that am underscore is game mode equals true. Else am underscore is game mode equals false. Alright, so once we're done with that, we can also call a reset function, and that will be implemented right after this. So we can break. The other two events that we need to track for are going to be there's going to be event, let's see, entity update, and though we're not going to be doing anything with it, we'll just have it here. So we can just break. Maybe you want to do something with it later on. Maybe it's a moving target. So you probably will want to use this for that. Then another case, which is going to be our collision. Like I said, this is kind of where the detecting of collision happens. And so there's that. And so we'll just break for now, and we'll add code here shortly. And the last but not least, start game. So case start game, and again we can call reset on this and break. Okay, so now that we have the events in place, the next thing that we want to do is let's do this reset function, because this is really simple. So again, you've probably seen this before. There's nothing that's new about it. Let's what I'm going to do, I'm just going to quickly copy and paste, so and just really quickly go over it. So first of all, we're going to do some of the cleanup, and that will be through freeing the slot and then unphysicalizing the slot that our geometry is going to go on. After that, let's load geometry. So just going to type that out. So it's going to be get entity and load geometry. Hey Oscar, welcome. No worries, no worries. There hasn't been a lot of stuff happening yet, but welcome. Okay, so we're going to load the geometry, of course, in slot 0, and then to this one, what we'll want to pass is that property right here that we've set up to be editable in the editor. Hey Mark, welcome. We have this intact geometry path, so we'll pass that into here. Yeah, hey, good to see you on the stream, so welcome. Alright, so this is going to be intact geometry path, but since we need to pass constant char to this, let's access its properties, which is value. So value is what we're looking for as far as what we need to load into into this component. Okay, so now that we have that in place, let's. I'm just going to quickly copy and paste some of the geometry params, which again are very basic, and you've seen these before. We set the mass to 10. You know, make it rigid, and let's also do some. I think that should be it actually. With that said, let's go ahead and physicalize this. So I'm just going to get the entity, TT. So Mark, today we're making the, as you can see here, a destroyable component. So it's going to be pretty interesting. We're going to have an explosion, or a particle effect being created, and sound being played once it gets destroyed, once it the entity is dead, basically. Sorry, component. Initialize, and we're going to pass the params. Okay, so we have all this stuff in place. One thing that we need to do next before we get into collisions is actually implement this reflect type. So for this one, this is hopefully it was a kind of a little bit of source of confusion in the beginning for me, but once you get the hang of it, it's actually not that bad. So this description kind of here parameter needs to have a few things. So in order for this to be kind of unique, so we gotta set a GUID, and in order to do that, this is going to be, it has to be called in a specific name. So cry and GUID, just like this. And in between the quotes, what we need to do is go to Tools and create a GUID. So usually most of the time by default this is selected, and I'm not sure if this is the one. No, this is it. So this is our GUID here. So we're just going to copy that and paste it right in here. And so that's part one. This is pretty much something that everyone needs to have it. And let's go ahead and do some of the other options for this. So this is going to be, we're going to set a editor category. So whenever you go in the editor, you will find it under this drop down. So this is going to be, I'm going to be calling this interactable components. Maybe we'll want to have something more in there in the future. You can use this to separate it from the other components in your components panel. All right, so let's go ahead and to this one we'll actually set the label, and I want to set label, and this is going to be destroyable component. There's that. Next, let's we can do a description. So an actual description. Set description, and this is going to be I named this destroyable component properties. There we go. All right, and now this, I'm just going to copy and paste this because I'm not entirely sure. I mean, it's probably stuff related to it's just setting the components flags, and like I said, there are some things that I'm just going to take at face value, and I'm going to know that I need them. I'm assuming probably this is for transformations, scaling and such. But like I said, can't really say much about this because I don't really know. All right, so now comes the fun part. We have kind of the the administrative stuff out of the way, with labels, names, and description. So now let's add some members. So these are going to be stuff that are going to be exposable in the editor, and hopefully in the schematic as well. So first one is going to be a the way we're going to access this is going to be through C destroyable component namespace, and in here, first of all, is going to be our life. So m_life, and then comes the second parameter is actually this. From what I can tell, this has to be a 4-letter parameter, so something that you can describe it, but keep it under 4. Because I mean, I think I've tried to make it more than 4 characters, and it didn't really work. Not entirely sure why, but all right. So then we have a short description for this, and I call this life. This is kind of the field name that you'll see, and so component life, and I'm not entirely sure why you need to declare all these. There's like there's another one, so I usually just call it the same, and then finally the value. So I kind of defaulted this at 1.0, but you can set it to something else. It's probably going to be editable in the editor anyways. So now that we have that in place, let's add our second member, which is going to be, again, just the same as this one. Let's see, destroyable component. And this is going to be our intact geometry path. And I've actually called this inta from intact. And then whatever is going to show in the editor is going to be our file path intact. And a short description, I call this intact. And so this is I kind of call that the description of what this is. So I just named it CGF to load. And then I just started it off with a default path to this. I'm not entirely sure. I was trying to actually pass this into this, but I don't think it works that way. So like I said, I haven't done too much digging into the schematic. It's still in its infancy. So we'll see with 5.5 if there's going to be more documentation and more details on it. Alright, so now we have the last member, which is our m_destroyed geom path. And I'm just going to do pretty much the same. I'm just going to copy this and rename a few of the things. Alright, so this is going to be destroyed and file path destroy. And the value for it is just going to be what we set it initially to here, sphere. Okay, so all that is out of the way. Let's see, where do we get an error over here about something? Oh, maybe it's the missing semicolon. There we go, that's out of the way. Okay, let's quickly build this, and let's see if we get any errors right off the bat. Hopefully everything is going to go okay. Alright, so that succeeded. One thing that I wanted to do before going into this even more, I wanted to show you this entity event collision. So like I said, I kind of went about it a little bit hackish, the way I'm looking at it at least. Hopefully, like I said, I'll find a better way to do it. If I do, I'm going to present it. But in the meantime, let's get some collisions. So first of all, let's do event. I'm kind of doing a safe check, I guess. So in param, just like all these events, they come out with these in params here. So this is going to be actually 1. So for example, if you look at the event collision, unfortunately there's not a lot of not a lot of details on it, and I believe this is going to be fixed in 5.5, that there's no comments on what this. And let's actually peek at the definition real quick. Yeah, so see, all the other ones are showing some things about these n param 0 or n param 1, if there is such a thing, but this one doesn't really have much. So I believe this has been added to 5.5. Okay, so so if this equals 0, we're going to break. Alright, so now this is kind of where the interesting part in my discovery came in. So we use this p collision that we've set up over here for the event phys collision. So p collision. And we set that equal. Again, this is something that I was able to find in Game SDK, and I think it's also in your bullet.h. So it's right here. The problem with this is that this was commented out, this line, but if you change that from event.pointer to event nparam 0, I mean right here, then you'll be able to track some details of the collision. So this is going to be again just a reinterpret cast. So we have event phys collision, and this is just a pointer, and we'll pass it event dot nparam 0. Okay, so through this p collision, I was able to determine. I was doing a cry log, and to this I was just passing. I was just interested in seeing, hey, can I get some kind of detail of what collided with this entity? And the one that I was able to find, and that at least it was unique in this case, was mass. So %signf, and I was actually passing p collision mass, and mass is actually an array. So and in my case, 0 was the mass of the bullet. So now let's go ahead and see if we can compile this and take a quick look at it in the editor and see what we get for the mass. So I'm just going to start through the local Windows debugger because it's a little quicker that way. As long as sometimes, oh yeah, it's the STL editor. Okay, so let's actually do our first test and see if this is actually bringing something in. So let's go to components. We have the interactable components category here, and we have destroyable component. So let's drag one of these guys in, and like we've seen before, this starts off with and let me just bring the properties and place it here in this pane. So this starts off with component life of 0, it's a primitive box and a primitive sphere when destroyed. So let's take a look and see if we can get some details on whatever collides with this. So let's go jump into game mode and put our weapon on, and let's see. So as you can see, the mass is 0.25. And now if we look at our, this is something that I wasn't able to figure it out, because it's probably something that has to deal with the impulse and you know, the initial velocity that we set to something, and the mass. So I'm not very good at physics. I'm not going to be attempting to you know, extrapolate from this how come the mass of the bullet was 0.25. But if we want to do a little bit of further testing, if we walk towards this, remember the player has a collision proxy, right? So and it has a mass. But if we collide with it, you'll see that the mass is 100, and that is what, if we look at our player here, let's see, where do we set this thing? 100. So if you look at the physicalized parameters, you'll notice that the mass of this is 100. So that way I was able to determine that, okay, you know, this is pretty much, this 0.25 is pretty much unique to that bullet class. I have yet to test that on a different system and see if that might change, but I doubt it that it will. So with that said, let's go ahead and actually do something to this. So in that regards, I'm just going to save it right there. So what we're going to do in here, since we registered our collision, let's go ahead and decrement the life of our destructible component. So we're just going to go ahead and call the function decrement life, and what we'll pass into it is going to be our p-collision mass 0. So like I said, hopefully I'll be able to figure out a better way to handle these collisions. I didn't just yet, but we'll go with what we currently have. Okay, so now that we're decrementing the life of it, let's actually implement this decrement life. So this is going to be pretty simple. A couple of checks that we need to make is our life still greater than 0, and is the component alive? So let's go ahead and do that. So if m underscore life is because we want to make sure that basically this is where we're going to call our, okay, you know, spawn our particle effect and you know, play our sound. So, and if this one is 0, then 0f, and m is still alive. So the reason for m is still alive is that we only want to do this once, right? So what we're going to do is we're going to call destroy object, and to this one, what we'll pass, if you remember from our destroyable component, we were passing a geom file name of path to destroy object. So in here, let's pass our path, mDestroy geometry path. Okay, so we've given it the new geometry. Now let's do apply the effects, which is going to be our particle effect and our sound. So apply the effect and set m alive to be equal to false. And I think we can also return out of this. In the other case that it's still alive, let's go ahead and actually test to see what the bullet mass of our object is. So if it equals, now that we've noticed that it's 0.25, like I said, this is where I'm saying that this is a little hackish, the way I'm doing it. So if it's that, then we want to decrement the life by a certain amount, and this you can put this in a variable. For this case, you know, since it's pretty simple, I'm just going to do a minus equal 1.0f. Okay, so now that we're decrementing things, let's also make sure that we're loading the object, because that would be a good test to have. So in that case, let's go ahead and copy what we have in reset, and I'm guessing you can always just use reset and pass this value into it. For now, I'm just going to keep it separate like that. But once we destroy the object, we actually want to load the m_destroy geometry path. So the values here you can always set to, you know, whatever you'd like, you know, probably something else. But for now, I'm just going to keep these values the same. Okay, so with that said, let's quickly give it a go and see if upon death, our geometry is being replaced with a destroyed geometry. So I think that keeps popping up because I have the audio controls editor open. I'm not entirely sure why that keeps going off, but so let's go into our example and start firing at this thing. Oh, there we go. Hey, that was a pretty quick, and I believe it's because I'm not removing the object. But as you can see, and also part of it is because this was already pretty much already dead. So let's actually give this a higher value of 4. So there's that, there's that. Whoops, I'm kind of shooting over it. What's going on? Let's try and delete this real quick. And there we go. Our object was replaced with what we had for the destroyable entity. So, so we have that in place. So the destroyable thing works. One thing to do next is actually to go ahead, and I think the only thing that we have left for this in its current state is to do our effects. So one of them was playing the sound, and the other one was to spawn the particle effect. In our apply effects function, what we're going to do is, first of all, let's actually create or make sure that we get to our particle effect. So this is going to be particle effect. And some of these files I'm going to copy from Game SDK because they have some good, pretty decent references, and they're readily available. I don't have to do much. Okay, so high particle effect. Oops, I went a little too far with that. Effect, and just a pointer. So this is going to be a P particle effect. And to get to a particle effect that you have as an actual file, is you got to go through the global environment variable, access your P particle manager, and through that you can find effect. So the one that I'm going to use, I'm just going to copy and paste this, is going to be a smoke and fire dot black smoke. This is how they're named. So let's go ahead and copy that. Quickly going to go into my, let's see, where do I have that? Stream Examo, there we go. So we have assets. And in here, under libs, currently I have no particle effects. So I'm just going to go ahead and navigate to, let's see, where do I have my Game SDK? So just bear with me for a quick second here. And that, and Game SDK, nope, that's not it. Game SDK. Okay, so I have it right here. And let's go to our assets, and I'm wondering if I already particles. There we go. So we have a list of particles here, and I'm just going to go ahead and copy this into here. So we have our particles. Now these particles rely on some textures, and they spawn some sprites. So in order to get to that, let's see, do we have something in here that this is looking for? I believe it's going to be this one. So let's go ahead and copy these sprites into our textures. So let's copy this and paste it right there. Okay, so now we have the sprites and we have the particles. One thing that we need to do is also get some sounds. So for this, I'm just going to use the STL, standard translation library, I believe. So let's look for some of those. So we have audio pack here. I'm just going to open this pack file since I don't think I have anything in here just yet. So under audio, let's go under SDL mixer, and let's see, we have all the sounds right here, so we don't have to worry about fmod or wise for now. That's just going to complicate things a little bit. So let's go into assets, and we have audio, and the SDL mixer. Right now we only have that default one that starts off the templates. So let's go ahead and copy the rest of them. I think the bullet might be in there as well. So, and did we get everything? Yeah, I think we got them all. So let's bring those in here, and I'm just going to skip that one file. Okay, so now we have the sounds, and we have our particle. So let's go ahead and quickly test the particle first. So for that, the other thing that we need to do is spawn our particle. So spawn particle effect, and that is P particle effect. And along with that, play the sound. So remember, this is only being done once, as long as that that thing was just barely destroyed. Okay, so now that we're playing the sound, since we're here, playing the sound is really simple, so let's add that in as well. Kind of, you know, getting these out of the way. So in order to do that, let's access Cry Audio, and let's create our control ID. So this is actually what our audio trigger is. So to do that, this is going to be control ID and audio control ID, and again this is just going to be Cry Audio audio. Alright, so, and this is just going to be string to ID, and the way I call this, I call that explosion. Okay, so once we got that, let's execute our trigger and, you know, pass in some data, because we want this to play, by default it would play at 0, 0, 0 for a word location, but we want it to play at where this entity is. So let's do Cry Audio and execute trigger data. This is a const. I'm going to call this data. So let's call this explosion, and then we need to pass in some of the other parameters. This is going to be the occlusion type. I haven't done too much digging into this, but there's probably quite a few things that you can do with some of these. So occlusion type, and this is going to be ignore. I'm kind of just using a basic one from Game SDK. And after that, let's see, we got this is going to be the transformation, which is get entity and get world position, and there's going to be a flag of true. I'm not entirely sure what some of these are actually for. You know, the occlusion, the sound occlusion is definitely, you know, it's pretty self-explanatory. And then we want to pass our audio control ID, which is the most important part of this. Okay. So once that is in place, let's actually play the sound. So through the global environment variable, you can go ahead and through the P audio system, we're just going to execute the trigger data. So execute trigger EX, and we're just going to pass it data. Okay, so with that being in place, let's go ahead and build this and see if we get the particle effect and the sound. We'll first have to add the trigger. So remember this explosion. That's what we're gonna need to add. So let's open our level, go to our audio control editors, and currently we only have the bullet impact in here. So what I'm going to do is just right click on this and add a folder, and I'm going to name this explosions. And inside here I'm just going to add a trigger. So this is going to be our explosion. And from our listing here, I believe there is one that is actually, is it explosion, or I can't remember what I had mine in my test named as. I know there was something that was kind of that was making kind of a noise, you know, kind of a popping noise. So let's see if we can track that again. I'm not entirely sure if it was water, not water, but where was that? Was it really a grenade? Environment dragonflies, explosion grenade. I think this one was it. So I'm just going to drag this in here and go ahead and save this. So let's jump into game mode and see if we get something out of this. So did we? Oh, there we go. I was able to hear that explosion. I'm not sure if you guys heard it as well, but the problem is the particle is not playing. So let's see what's going on with that. Let me actually crank up the volume on this, and let's see if we can hear that a little better. So and I think that's part of the entity reset that I need to do this. So Oscar, I'm not sure if you heard it that time. I was able to hear it on my end. Hopefully you were able to hear it as well. I cranked up the volume a little higher. So the last thing that okay, you heard it. Perfect. That's good. That's good. So the sound played as intended. So one thing that that I wanted to do is let's see about this particle effect and why it isn't actually playing. And I think I might have a theory on it. Let's change the primitive to a sphere, or actually I'm actually going to do it in game, so that's a good way to test it. I'm going to change it to a primit. I think the way I remember this particle is that it's pretty contained, so it's probably within that sphere once we destroyed it. So let's go ahead and change this to a pyramid. I think that might be a little smaller, so hopefully we'll be able to see the particle. And nope. Huh. I can't see it, but why? What am I missing? Particle effect. Oh, I know what I'm missing. Huh, duh. Because the spawn particle, or this function, I believe it's empty. So, well, I mean, I could probably do it, right? Okay, so let's quickly add our stuff to this. So if we do have a proper particle effect, then what we need to do is let's get our location where we want to spawn this. So I'm going to just do a vec3, and it's probably not really necessary to do this, but and I think I'm going to skip this. There's no need to add another variable in there. So let's do an sEntity params, entity params. My spelling is off the charts today. is sEntity spawn params. There we go. Okay, so that I'm going to name this params, and let's do the position for it. So params dot v position is going to be equal to get entity and get position. All right. So now the thing that we want to do is we got an I particle called emitter, and I'm going to make this a pointer, and this is p emitter. And that's going to be set to p particle effect. And through the p particle effect, we're going to actually spawn this. So we'll go ahead and spawn. And where do we want to spawn it? We want to spawn it at params.vPosition. And once that is in place, let's go ahead and return our p emitter. Okay, so now that we're returning that, I think we should be all set. I'm not entirely sure. I don't think this one needs to return anything. So let's go ahead and build this and see if this time we get our particle as well. Maybe it does need to have something in here. So let's go ahead and return null. Let's try it that way. Alright, so that build it. Let's start up the editor here and see what we get out of our thing. So there's our little object. Jump into game mode. Let's do some, marksman shooting here if we can actually land it on it. So there's our particle effect, and apparently it seems that I think I might have messed up some of the paths for the sprites. And that's why it's probably, as you can see, texture sprite smoke tile.d. Let's take a look at that and see why that is having a little bit of a fit. So it's looking for assets, textures, sprites, smoke, and smoke tiled. I'm actually not seeing. Oh, there it is. It should be right there. So one thing that I'm gonna try and do here real quick is go into the asset browser and let's quickly generate repair all metadata. Now let's try this again. So I'm just gonna delete this here. There's something weird about that. I'm not entirely sure why it's not loading. It's not loading the particle effect as I was hoping, or at least not the. It's doing the particle effect, but not the. Not loading the proper texture. So that was kind of a bummer for this. That's interesting. Why? Since the path is correct. Let's see, what's the difference from that to my test project? I'm wondering if there's. So I have texture sprites. That's the same. Oh, but it's quite a difference actually in the size of the folder. So let me quickly delete this and actually bring in because this was actually quite a lot bigger. It's like 113 megabytes instead of what I originally had of 10 megabytes. So let's see if we can, I think I might need to reset this real quick, just because I think one of the events is not working properly right now. It's still not loading yet, so let's try loading the engine again. Oh, no, that wasn't the one that I wanted. It was Stream Examo. Just quickly close this and take another look at this. So now, as I was saying, with this you can import different assets. Like I tested it with one of the game SDK. There is like a barrel and a destroyed barrel. So we can actually do that. But let's take another look at this. Okay, there we go. So now the particle effect is loaded as more as expected. So the last thing that I wanted to do is kind of just a little bit of a nicety type thing. It's not anything that's oh, my mind is blown kind of thing. So I'm just going to quickly copy the barrel, which is this one here, and the textures are in there this time, and it looks good for that. So let's go ahead and jump back into our project and actually give it some, not just test geometry type stuff, but actually give it something that's destroyed. And so let's go ahead and let's see if we can actually see these. There's that, and there's destroyed. Okay, so there we go. We have it. We have the little object right there. I'm probably gonna have to step back a little. Oh, there we go. That was pretty quick. I think I hit it multiple times somehow. So let's try and replace this, or actually just move it into position kind of like that, and try and shoot at it. So there we go. But like I was mentioning before, I'm not removing the bullets off of upon collision, so some of them might still collide with this a second time. So you might want to do that, because I think in one of the previous projects that we were working with, in Bullet we commented out this gentity remove entity. So I would recommend you uncomment that if you want something that's more exact. Okay, so with that said, this stream actually lasted a little longer. We went through quite a few things, adding a spawn, a particle effect, adding, playing some sounds, decrementing the life of the component, putting it in kind of a dead or destroyed state, and doing all, exposing all these parameters to the editor so you can, change it as you like. One thing, like I said, that I'm going to be looking into some more is this entity event collisions, because like I said, this is not something that I really like how it's done. It seems to work just fine for me, but I wish I'd be able to figure out a better way to do it. That said, there's ways to track the collision from the bullet, but that might be a little bit more complicated to actually be able to get this component once the bullet hits it, and then call decrement life and so on and so forth. That's probably a little bit beyond my C++ skills at the moment. So, but if I figure out a better way to do it, I'll share it with you guys. So with that said, thank you guys so much for stopping by, and we'll see you next time. Hopefully next week, what I'm thinking of doing is actually keep working with weapons and stuff, but it's going to be on a little bit different. It's going to be about throwing a stone, which is something that I want to do for my project. So I was thinking of trying that out and sharing it with you guys. Thank you, Oscar. Thank you, Mark, for stopping by, and you guys have a nice Sunday as well. So and a nice week. Again, thank you guys, and we'll see you next week. Hopefully, it'll be pretty interesting. Throwing stones at one of these destroyable entities or destroyable components. All right, you guys take care.